Good evening, everyone. Happy Saturday. We are so excited that we are on part two of our relationship breakup series, and we have so much that we are going to discuss today. As mentioned, Faith Edgar, who is a social worker, will be joining us today to talk about what is abuse and what are some of the characteristics and behaviors to identify them and how to heal. But before I bring Faith to the stage, I just want to share with you guys the importance of discerning certain characteristics in relationship because you want to be in the right space with individuals. Good evening, Vanessa. Thank you for joining. So, as I mentioned, I am an author and an empowerment speaker. And one of my missions in life is to just educate people on relationships and breaking away from toxic relationships and giving you guys the tools on how to make better decisions on having the right people in your space. So, I am going to read Miss Faith's bio, and then we are going to jump right into today's relationship breakup podcast series, part two. Faith Edgar has devoted her life's work to the protection of children, women, and families. She's a daughter, sister, aunt, niece, mentor, friend, and community leader. She believes everyone deserves a champion, someone who cares about their well-being. Currently, she is a senior facilitator with the Workforce Institute at the City College of New York. She served 19 years providing professional development and training to child welfare staff across 5 boroughs of New York. Her professional work areas are child protection, foster care, and preventative services, substance abuse. She served as a substance abuse counselor, caseworker in a residential mental health care facility. She also served as a social worker at a tier two family shelter in Harlem, a social worker at a hospital, and therapist for veterans. Faith teaches staff how to spot and advise victims of intimate partner violence. She facilitated a women's support group that empowered shelter residents to gain resources to socially, emotionally, physically, and financially enrich their lives. Faith is devoted to her family, her church, and her community. She's a national alumni, so she's a part of the National Alumni Association of Spelman College. Where my Spelman ladies at? She is a Delta Sigma Theta. Where my Deltas at? And she is a part of the Friends of Newark Symphony Hall. She's a member of the St. James AME Church in Newark, New Jersey, where she serves as a steward and dance ministry leader. She's an amazing dancer. She's also a native of Northern New Jersey, and she's earned her bachelor's in arts in psychology from Spelman College, and she holds a master of social work from New York University. Her motto is that she hopes to guide people and to have the ability to manage challenging relationship and always remembering that you do not have control over what others do. You only have control over yourself and how you choose to respond. And not only that, Faith is a very, very dear friend of mine, and I'm just so excited that she has decided to join us on today. So at this time, I am going to bring to the stage Miss Faith Edgar. Come on into the stage, Faith.
Hello, 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 hello. Thank you for having me, Nicole.
You're very, very welcome. I'm so excited that you decided to join us today.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. All right, so let's jump right into it. So before we get into our questions,
Mhm.
let's just let people know who you are. So let's tell people a little bit about yourself and a fun fact that you would like to share.
Ooh, a fun fact. Well, I think pretty much What I think about in terms of me as a professional, one of the things about me is that I've always been committed to the work that I do with families. I have always been an advocate. I've always been very focused on giving people resources and information. And so, even though I've been doing training for the last 19 years, prior to that, like I'm still connected to families and what they experience. So I'm a clinician at heart.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about the work. And in terms of a fun fact, I love to travel, and I love to travel and learn about other cultures and have different experiences, like to experience things that I wouldn't normally experience, here. So my last trip was Ghana.
That's
Yes, that was my last major trip. And
wow.
yeah, so that experience was just, it was culture, it was spiritual,
Yes.
emotional, it was everything, more than I
Yes.
could ever imagine. So,
Yes. Yeah. That's great you had the opportunity to experience that. I actually went to Ghana as well.
yes,
And I share the same sentiments. We have people in the comments saying, awesome. Good evening, Shakira. Good evening, Lynette. So people are excited that you had that experience.
awesome.
Yes, yes. All right. So let's get right into it. Now, with your experience with being a social worker, you have a very broad professional experience, and I'm sure you've seen a lot. So, can you define for us what abuse is?
So, abuse pretty much is any type of action that intentionally causes harm or causes
Mm,
some type of injury to another person. And
mm,
there are actually different types and forms of abuse. So
mm,
it can be physical, it can also be psychological,
mm,
mental abuse.
mm.
Yeah, so it's so many different types and forms of
Yeah.
abuse.
Okay. So, what would you say is your, I guess, your understanding of control? Because I feel like abuse and control is very interconnected,
It is.
but there might be a difference. So, what is your, how would you define control?
Control is actually in the center of abuse.
Mm,
Right.
mm,
That's what it leads to abuse. That
mm,
sense of wanting to control and want to dictate,
mm,
having like dominion over someone,
mm,
dominating them,
mm.
and just trying to just dictate every aspect of that person's life. So it
Yeah.
also can include power.
Mm,
Because I don't know, you may have heard sometimes that's also together as well, power and control.
yeah.
And that's at
Yeah.
the heart, in the center of abuse and what leads
Mm.
to it.
Wow, you use some really powerful words. You said control is at the center of abuse, is dominating, and it's like taking dominion. And those
Mhm.
words are very powerful in both the negative and the positive, but we're
Yes,
talking about the negative.
right.
Um, so what is your definition of trauma?
So trauma comes from people being exposed to different things. Sometimes it can be an isolated incident that somebody experiences trauma. It also can be a series of different events, right? Sometimes
Mm,
people almost like they get re-traumatized,
mm,
depending
mm,
on what type of experience they're having, what type of abuse, that they're
mhm.
having. And what happens is that it impacts the emotional, aspect of a person. It can also be life threatening. So anything that kind of alters,
Yeah.
whatever that event is or series of events that can really alter that person's emotional state and how they
Mm,
manage, that impacts their life. It has lasting effects.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it could be mental. It can have physical implications. It can impact how people engage socially.
Yeah.
And also, it can have an impact on just their spiritual well being as well.
Mm. Wow, those are really good, and I like that you said it. it alters the person's emotional state. So
Yes.
we can't as a person who maybe didn't experience another person's trauma
Hmm.
minimize their trauma or say,
No,
"Oh, that wasn't traumatic." So trauma is personal to everyone.
it is. It absolutely is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so can you what are some places control abuse or trauma can show up in?
Wow. It can show up anywhere.
Mm.
But when you think about, most relationships that people would first of all go to is, people's personal relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship, right?
Mhm.
And so we see that a lot, especially when we talk about intimate partner violence, which is very
Mm.
specific to people who are romantically involved,
Mhm.
right? And so, that kind of power and control dynamic can occur in those instances. It
Yeah.
could be physical, but again,
Mhm.
not necessarily. Sometimes it can be, verbal,
Mm.
it can be emotional, it can also be financial. We don't really think about financial abuse, right? But
Yeah.
that's another aspect. So definitely in those personal relationships, but then it also could be in general, any relationship. It can be between family members.
Mm.
It can be
Yeah.
abuse between family members, between siblings, between a parent and a child. um you know uh Friendships, can
Yeah.
be abusive again, because we're not just talking about physical, but when we try to manipulate people, because there's an aspect of manipulation.
Oh,
Oh, I
yeah.
saw that. I saw that. that, that
That
word
that hit a nerve.
is huge. Is huge, and so that
Yeah.
manipulation can occur in any relationship, and then
Yeah.
also in the workplace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we think about, we're seeing a lot of, jobs,
Mm.
where, there's a requirement to have workplace violence training yearly, right? Because there are things that are happening in offices, so that type of violence can escalate, in work environments as well.
Mm. I'm so glad you are pointing out the different areas where trauma, abuse, and control can show up at. And I think, friendships, like you said, can be one of them. The
Mhm.
workplace, definitely. And I know for me, and I know I'm not the only one that may think this, but I never thought that trauma or abuse or control could show up in the workplace or in friendships,
Yes,
but they can. I think we're so used to thinking about it in romantic relationships
exactly,
or
exactly,
the dating space, but you're saying that it can show up in a lot of different other areas in our lives.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's important for people to know that because being able to identify abuse and control
Mhm.
in our own personal trauma can help us guard our hearts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well
Yeah.
said. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are some personality traits or characteristics of individuals who behaviors are abusive or controlling? Like, what does that personality look like? Just to give the audience a description of what to look out for.
Wow. Um, that's a very good question, right? Because really, being able to recognize is what's going to really be helpful, for
Yes.
anyone who is in an abusive, relationship or a situation or dynamic. Some traits and some things. I don't want it to sound like when you hear these things that if you see it, it's like you're an abuser, like
Right.
like we're automatically like anytime you see it, but in the
Right.
context of some traits, paying attention to them in connection with other things, that
Mm,
I'll talk about in a second. But in terms of people who are jealous, but the jealousy is taken to a whole nother level of
mm,
jealousy.
mm-hmm,
Um, in terms of that person who, anytime you're around anyone else other than them,
mm,
it's a problem.
mm,
Who is that? There's assumptions made that that person is. impacting the relationship that they have with you. So they kind of don't want that person there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody who's very just super possessive,
Mm.
right? That again, no one else can have you but me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
No one else can care for you the way I can, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need me, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're the center of the world, right? Or want to be, or see themselves in that way. Um, Sometimes they can be hypersensitive,
Mm.
just to anything, that's said. And so just really, you know, um, it really resonates. It really stands out.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
sometimes we can, get in our feelings, but a person who has a personality, you know, um, trait that can be considered abusive or lead to
Mm-hmm.
behavior. I want to be, mindful of
Yes.
how we frame that.
Yes.
Um, it's just magnified,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in
Mm-hmm.
terms of sensitivity. And then another thing too that people want to think about, that the person who is the abuser, there is something that is lacking in them. Sometimes they have low self-esteem. So
Mm.
even though they may present as if they're very confident in the way that they engage, with whether it's their, partner, friend, or whoever, that relationship, is,
Yeah.
they actually have low self-esteem, which is why they
Mm.
need to have that power and control,
Mm.
right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
that's how they have to exert themselves. That's how they get that, you know,
Yeah.
confidence, right? Is
Yeah.
based on, trying to, kind of fill a void, if that
Yes.
makes sense, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so again, and I know I'm gonna say this word again. I know when I said it earlier, you kind of jumped at it. Manipulative.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that trait is a huge, red flag in terms of
Yeah.
the levels of manipulation, right?
Mm.
And it leads to a term that you sometimes might hear, especially we talk about intimate partner violence, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just intimate partner violence. Again, just any type of abusive relationship, gaslighting, right?
Oh.
Where
Mm.
you kind of, have the person who is being abused think that they're crazy,
Mm.
kind of downplaying, what they're experiencing at the hands of that person that's doing the abuse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That, you're overreacting. It didn't
Mm.
really happen like that. It's really not that serious, right? They
Mm-hmm.
try to turn the
Mm-hmm.
tables and have you think, that, something's wrong with you
Yeah.
when it really isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are just some things. I mean, there's a whole lot of other,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
traits, but those are, some major ones.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think we might have to come back for a part two for your session because this this
It's a lot to
is
unpack.
such, yeah, to a lot to unpack, a lot to unfold. And you said so many nuggets. Especially the part where you were talking about jealousy and possessiveness. And
Mhm.
I think you gave a great example of what it looks like um on a, I guess, the obvious signs, right? But sometimes there are subtle signs that we may not be able to detect right away,
Right.
that we think maybe love or care.
Absolutely.
Um, because sometimes I'll have, my high school students share stories about their experiences with people they're talking to or getting to know. And, I'm like, okay, they interpret that as them really liking them, or
Exactly. Oh, they love me.
they
They
love
care
me,
about me
or
so much. Yes.
yes, or they're, doing everything to pursue them
Hmm.
when that's not the case. So I think to your point, right? Being, just understanding what these character traits are, just being able to decipher the obvious signs and the ones that are not so obvious.
Right. Right.
Um, and then you said something else. You said usually those who experience who are abusive or showing signs, they have low self-esteem.
Yes.
And I know for a lot of people that might be hard to believe because of how they approach the world, how aggressive they may be. And
Mm-hmm.
so that I think is a true nugget that I hope people really do take away from what you just shared.
Yes.
Yeah. So, for a person that finds themselves in a situation that is abusive, what should they do without compromising their safety or place of employment or feeling guilty for leaving? Because sometimes people experience that when they're in those very challenging situations.
I really appreciate that question, Nicole. And one of the reasons why I appreciate it is because you said without compromising their safety. Because a lot
Mm,
of times people don't think about that. Sometimes we see people in situations and we just say, well, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just leave? But what
mm-hmm.
people don't realize is that it's not that simple.
Right. Yeah.
Because actuality, a person may be more at risk of more serious harm or even death. And that's a
Mm,
scary
yeah.
thing to think about when they actually leave, or even if that abuser realizes that they're planning on leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something like 5 times more likely, like, to, experience, more serious harm or death
Yeah.
when they
Wow.
leave. And so I like that you added in without compromising their safety. And
Yeah.
so it has to be very strategic. And so a person that's in that situation, first of all, it's important to acknowledge it, what it is, because sometimes people may not realize that they're in an abusive relationship. Like as
Yeah.
you were just sharing about, the teenagers that you're working with, and they're sharing with you about their relationship. And for them, it's like, oh, this is cute. This is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in love. They
Mm-hmm.
really, care about me. But what people, don't realize is that the dynamics that we talked about, it's tactics, they're the tactics that are used by abusers, that manipulation, the different ways that they try to control that person. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you take away that power and control from that abuser, that person is going to have to really kind of know, when they realize that they're in an abusive situation, they're going to have to really know what the triggers are for that
Mm-hmm.
abuse. And so be able to share that with someone, right? Find somebody that they trust.
Yeah.
In your case, like, you're talking about working with teens, a counselor or someone, if they don't feel comfortable going to their parents. Um,
Yeah.
for others, of other another family member, or someone should know what they're experiencing, so
Yeah.
that they can help them. They need to start making a plan. We always
Yeah.
talk about safety planning. And so a part of that safety plan is really identifying not just your support system,
Mm.
of people you trust, but contact information for key people, right? That are again, that are familiar with the situation, so that
Mhm.
they don't inadvertently kind of share information that can put you in more danger, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you have children and you're in that situation, and we don't always think about children in these
Mm.
instances and the impact that
Yeah.
they have, but they can be a part of that planning process, because sometimes an abuser might use children
Mhm.
to get to,
Yep.
that person. And
Yeah.
so, how do we prepare children, to not, disclose, certain information? Do they know what to do if, there is danger?
Yeah.
um, Run to the neighbor. Like, these are just some different things that can be done, in terms of having things ready, having important documents ready. Again, it's
Mhm.
not something that people would think about, right? We know that we have, we always want to have, make sure we know where our paperwork is.
Yep.
you
Mhm.
but having, like, money set aside, something, just so that you can have that, just in
Yep.
case if you have to leave, right away. And then also, having a safe word, creating a
Mm.
safe word or a phrase or some type of signal, right,
Yeah.
to just kind of alert and say that, you know I'm not in a good space right now. I'm
Yeah.
not feeling very safe right now. And
Yeah.
we do this universal sign, like for intimate partner violence, like if and this came out of like from the pandemic, where you had to be kind of strategic, in terms of, we had to be sheltering in place, you know,
Mhm.
so, you have people who could be actually sheltering in place with their abuser.
Oof.
So like, how do you, if you're doing like a WhatsApp, check-in, how would you know, what's going on? So it's just kind of like putting the fingers up like this, and then just kind of going like that, closing the fist.
Wow.
And that's a
Wow.
signal, you know, for, whoever is, connected to that the survivor, or, the victim, um,
Yeah.
that look, it's not good right now. I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Wow.
those are some of the things that, can be done, but you
Yeah.
have to be very strategic, and someone has to know what's going on. And even with the schools as well, letting the school know if you have an order of protection, you know,
Yeah.
the school should know that, right? So that they can also help to honor that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very important. And I think having the right community
Yes.
around you, like you mentioned, that's gonna, protect you and not say anything, but
Right.
having that community is very, very important and
Yes.
needed, very
Yes.
much needed.
Absolutely.
So why do you believe that people are sometimes afraid to leave a romantic relationship or friendship or work, experience, um, if they are experiencing abuse, control, or have had some traumatic experiences? Why do you think people are afraid to leave?
Wow, Nicole, that's there could be so many different reasons when I think about that question, right? Everybody's situation is going to be different.
Yeah,
Sometimes people stay in these situations because they don't know anything different,
yeah,
right? And when you talk about, like trauma, if you had a traumatic childhood, and if you witnessed, in your household, an abusive dynamic,
yeah,
between maybe the adults in your household. And so now you're that adult, and you feel that that's the norm.
yeah,
So you don't really know, what's different. You right? You
yeah,
think that that's how it's supposed to be.
right.
Sometimes people feel that, you know, they may have been beaten up so bad, not just physically, but
Mm,
mentally, right?
mm,
If you repeatedly hear no one else is going to want you, you're nothing, you need me, you're stupid, or whatever it is that those tactics that are used by that abusive partner, you may feel that this is the best that you can do.
mm.
So I mean, it's really powerful in terms of how deep
Ooh,
it
yeah.
is, when you think about it.
Yeah, it goes very deep. And like you said, if that's all they hear, that's
Mhm.
all they know. And that's what they believe for themselves. That becomes a part of their like belief system and how they see themselves.
Yes.
And it definitely has an impact on their lives.
Hmm.
Wow. So we talked about like control
Hmm.
mentally, physically, control and abuse mentally, physically, emotionally, even spiritually.
Yes.
What do you think are some of like the ramifications of being in a relationship with someone like that? And we just talked about it. Belief
Hmm.
system is one way
Yes.
ramification.
Absolutely.
Are
Absolutely.
there any other ramifications?
I mean, you pretty much just you kind of lose your identity, right?
Mm,
Because especially depending on the extent of the control or level of control that person has, right? That abuser has over that partner.
yeah.
You almost kind of, you could have been a very confident person, very self-assured, very
Yeah.
driven. But if you're in a situation where you're constantly put down
Yeah.
and like knocked off of your pedestal, if you will, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You kind of may forget who that confident person was.
Yeah.
It's like that person never existed. So
Mm.
it's a lot of repair that would have
Mm.
to be done, right? To kind of, regain that power back, to claim that
Mm.
back. Because like, it's again, it's power taken away from you. Your self-esteem is impacted,
Yeah.
right? You question your self-worth,
Mm.
right? And again, whatever it is that abuser tells you are is what you believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what's worse. I don't know if there's anything worse than that. Just losing yourself.
Yeah, it is. That's a difficult space to be in,
Mhm.
whether it's a work relationship or a romantic relationship, or you broken up with someone, right? Because the name of this podcast is relationship breakups, and sometimes we get to our wits end when we decide to leave, and then we get to a space where, like you said, we have to regain that power. And I like that you said regain that power, because we are never without hope. We
Nope.
can always build ourselves back up, no matter the damage that has been done to us.
Absolutely.
We are There is always life after hurt.
Absolutely.
Always. Always.
Absolutely.
Yeah. um So, in your experience with just being a therapist, um, is there a path forward for people who have suffered abuse and have been controlled? Is there a path forward? And if so, what does that look like?
There is absolutely a path forward. And I think you kind of alluded to it just with, you share, right? There's always light on the other side, right? And so that's where resilience comes in, and so there are people who have been through things that you couldn't even imagine, but you
Mm-hmm.
would never know it because they don't look like what they've been through.
Yes.
And so you first have to give yourself grace, right? Because again, it's just like a wound that just keeps on getting, reopened, right?
Mm,
It takes a while. It's deep sometimes. It takes some time to heal. And so
yeah.
you kind of have to give it, time to heal. So we have to give ourselves time. If you're in a situation like that, you have to give yourself time to heal. So give yourself grace, right?
Yes.
And it's not always easy. Like you don't have to judge yourself. You don't
Yeah.
have to feel embarrassed, right? Because again, you didn't create the situation that
Yeah.
you're in. So
Yeah.
one of the things that when you think about moving forward, you have to just remind yourself that you deserve the best. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be appreciated. You deserve to be happy and have a healthy life and have so supportive relationships. Right? So you
Mm,
have that power to do that
yeah.
and just give yourself that time. It's a process. Everything is a process.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to emphasize what you said, that we deserve the best.
Mhm.
Whoever's watching this, you deserve the best. You deserve the best. Somebody said, "Yes, Lord." Hey, Sadia, I felt every word that came out of her mouth. Yes,
Amen.
that,
Oh, I said
yes.
amen. It's okay for me to say amen.
It's
That's
all right
like
for
an
you to
amen
say
moment
amen.
right there.
Amen. Yes. People are saying great information. Yes, yes.
Awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is always, always a path forward, and we don't have to stay stuck. And I think, as we take time to, process and heal, um, you have to give yourself grace, because one
You
of the
do.
things that sometimes we do is we beat ourselves up on
Oh,
top of the
we are
trauma that we've already experienced, right?
yes, we are our own worst enemy. Our own worst
Yes.
enemy. So critical of ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about, like, for a brief moment, are there strategies that we can start putting into place as people, as women, as men, to prevent getting in those types of relationships or experiences? Are there any preventative ways?
Hmm. Interesting question. You know, I mean, honestly, I think the more you know, the better it is to help you just again to just be able to identify. And I
Mm,
think that that's just like a really big piece of it. Um, if you are aware of what to look for, if you're more, it make you a more alert, if you will. You'll pay attention to certain behaviors that you may have ignored before, but you just have a
mm,
different perspective and different take on it. And so I will also say, because sometimes we do this, right? We may have gotten, we always say, I felt it in my stomach. I felt it in my gut. I got a gut feeling.
oh,
But sometimes we ignore that gut. But
yeah,
sometimes
we do.
that
We
gut
do.
feeling is
Yeah,
like,
we do.
hello, red light,
Yeah.
hello, yellow, like, right? Pay attention. So trust those instincts because there's something to that,
Yeah.
right? And so usually that first feeling that you have usually is the correct,
Yeah.
feeling. And so just being aware and paying
Mm,
attention, just paying attention. If
yeah.
something doesn't feel okay,
Yeah.
then it probably isn't,
Mm,
right? And it's all about how you feel,
mm,
right?
mm.
That's what matters. It's about what you feel, right? And
Yeah.
if you're not comfortable, and that's
Yeah.
dictated only by you.
Yeah. Yes, and it's only determined by you. And this is such a great conversation because, to be very honest and transparent, it wasn't until my late 30s
Hmm.
I began to identify certain characteristics that were, or tendencies or behavior patterns that could lead to abuse, that could lead to control, and that felt like manipulative.
Hmm.
Before I would ignore them, I
Yes.
would make excuses, or I would say to myself, "Oh, that's not what they really meant," or
Hmm.
maybe I interpreted it incorrectly.
Hmm.
But no, it
Yes.
didn't feel right to me. And now I'm in a space where I'm not silencing that voice or pushing
Yes.
that voice down, and I'm paying attention to it. And not that we are to be judgmental of people or extra critical, but I think it's very important for us to take note, to, of
Absolutely.
course, pray about it, and then being able to identify those feelings that don't feel good to us. Because, like you
Mhm.
said, we're the only ones that can determine what doesn't feel right for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
want can I just thank you, Nicole, for that? Because I'm
Hmm.
sure when you were saying that, and I'm listening to you, and I'll say you're not alone, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't matter, how much experience you have or have not had, what your title is, position is. We have been through things that in hindsight you can look back and reflect and say, "Oh my goodness, that's what was going on. I did not realize
Mm,
it." So we all have experienced that and just probably didn't realize we experienced it because I've had those moments as well.
yeah. Yeah.
You reflect.
Yeah. Yeah. Reflecting is good. And I think, as women of this generation, I also feel like it's our responsibility to help the younger generation
Absolutely.
to help identify these these
Mhm.
things so that they don't make the same mistakes. And so that's what my hope is for this platform.
Awesome.
Yeah. So okay, so let's go back on topic. I know we kind of got off a little bit. We was going in deep, but
It's all connected. It's all connected.
all connected, right? Um, so not to pinpoint anyone, and I think we kind of talked about this, but not to pinpoint anyone, but But for individuals who experience abuse and control, are there certain areas in a person's personal development that they can become stronger in? Like, just for example, I did not, like I said, I used to like suppress my voice or
Mhm.
my feelings when I felt certain things. So I had to develop that
Mhm.
that strength inside of myself to say, no, Nicole, this isn't
Your
right.
voice
And
matters. Yeah.
yes, your voice matters. And so, are there certain like personal developments that people should work on if they've experienced these type of relationships, especially if it's like a cycle? Because I was in a cycle of doing this.
Got
So, yeah,
it. So, and I appreciate the question. I want to be clear on how I respond to it.
sure.
And so I want to preface it by saying that in terms of people's personal development in areas that they see, is very personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
very specific to them and what that person sees for themselves. So that's something that's separate and apart,
Okay.
that I want to make sure I make that clear, in
Sure.
terms of as it relates to the abuse or that trauma that they may have experienced, because
Mm-hmm.
the onus is not on the person who experienced the abuse.
Mm.
If this is making sense, you know where I'm going with this. So I don't
Yes.
want to give that, like there's something that they need to do so that they're not a victim, or said that they're not going to be, the target of abuse, because again, the abuser is responsible for their behavior. They are
Yeah.
always the person that has to be accountable for
Yes.
the trauma that they create and the control that they try to inflict on the other person. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And thank you for saying that.
No, no problem. And so, in terms of, personal development, you said something, to kind of, add to it, that if you have been in a repeated kind of cycle, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for that, there has to be, a time for just self reflection. This is why it's so important to really, take that time with yourself. And I'm a big proponent of self, awareness, self reflection. You need that sometimes, because you just said it yourself that, like, to even realize that there's a pattern. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people never get to that point. It
Mm.
becomes about everyone else is the problem, or it
Yeah.
becomes that I'm that, perpetual victim, right?
Mm.
As opposed to, in every relationship, there's a dynamic, right?
Mm.
And people contribute one way or the other, right? And so you really, for personal development, have to be able to sit with yourself and be honest with yourself. And sometimes that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's hard
Yeah.
to be honest sometimes, right? And it might be
Mhm.
even harder for the person who is the abuser to do
Mm.
it. And so
Yeah.
that's why, like, for them, they're going to need more accountability raised,
Yeah.
because sometimes with abusers, it becomes about externalizing everything.
Mm.
Everything is, I did this because I abused you because of what I experienced.
Yeah.
It becomes around them, and then it just becomes like, well, this is what I experienced, so this is what I'm giving back to you. Take it or
Yeah.
leave it. But you have to take accountability. So
Yeah.
for the abuser, they have to be able to be accountable for what they did and the harm that they caused. They have to be at a place that they can see and understand the harm that they have, the impact that they had on their partner or family members or coworkers, whatever, that abusive situation is. And for the person who is a survivor, right? Because
Mm.
language is also important too, because survivor kind of gives, kind of like empowers that person, right? Who, came out of that
Yeah.
abusive situation. And so for that survivor, just recognizing again that, you know, if you see certain things happen, and just kind of being in tune with, you know, what it is that you want, right?
Mm.
Setting boundaries and being okay with saying, I do not want this. This is not going to be okay for me. This is not working for me. I don't want that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And being okay with it. Protecting your peace.
Protecting your peace. Y'all need to write that in the chat.
No
Protect your
apology.
peace.
Yes, protect your peace at all times, and you don't have to apologize,
Yeah.
right? So if that development, again, it's going to be very individual, very personal for each person because people
Yeah.
have different experiences.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You said I'm like jotting things down as as you're writing. Yes. And I love everything you said, especially the piece about the abuser needs to be held accountable, right?
yes,
And that's very, very true. Um, but on the other end, what like for abusers who may not want to hold themselves accountable or may deny a certain experience. And I know we're going down a whole
oh no, no,
different
no, no,
path.
no, bring it. This is good. This is good.
So for individuals who, you know, don't admit or deny, what advice do you have for the survivor? Because that in and of itself is traumatic.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, remember, and you said this in the intro, right? And we do not have control
Yes.
over what someone else does or doesn't do. We don't have control over other people's thoughts or perceptions, right?
Mm,
But we have control over ourselves and what we want for ourselves.
yeah.
And you can leave that person right where they are.
Mm-hmm.
You have to again, it's about you putting you first,
Yeah.
giving yourself permission to take care of yourself
Mm,
by any means necessary. And
yeah.
so it's not even about, that abusive partner or person at that moment. It's about you and what do you want for yourself. Sometimes you have to just leave people where they are.
Mm,
And we talk about pray for people. You got to just, pray for people and love people from a distance.
mm, yeah.
Because again,
Yeah.
it's about you, right? It's about your, taking care of yourself and putting yourself first. Everybody has the right to be free of violence, abuse of any kind. Um, yes, you have that.
Yeah. 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 And I like that you said leave people where they are because the only person we can control is
Yeah,
ourselves. And like you said, our freedom comes from within. So
yeah.
we have to make that the focus if they're not
Hmm.
being held or admitting to what they've done.
Yes.
Yeah. So why do you think it's so important for people to heal from these experiences?
Well, I think some of the things we've mentioned connect to that question, right? And it's a very important question because if you don't heal from something, it makes it easier for you to be susceptible to ending up in the same situation,
Mm,
right? Because you didn't really heal. Sometimes we go from, relationship to relationship. Sometimes we, think, well, I'm just move here. Maybe that'll take care and cancel out.
mm,
But if you had certain painful experiences that just were never addressed, they're dormant.
mm.
And then they may show up in the next relationship.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that you're bringing baggage, emotional
Mm,
baggage, and pain from a previous experience. And then sometimes you can also project
mm.
things off onto the person. Maybe the current relationship that you're in, that person actually is really a good person, but
Yeah.
maybe they said something and you were triggered because maybe
Yeah.
it was used in a different context,
Yeah.
in your previous abusive, relationship. And so now there you go, the trigger. And now
Mm,
it's almost like you have now put that onus on this person. And it's not even about them, but it's because of previous hurt, previous pain that you never really dealt with. or that you
Yeah.
didn't even realize or recognize. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, we talk about forgiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when
Mm.
we talk about forgiveness and how, you have to forgive so that you can free yourself and not, make things, a challenge for that next person who might be that person
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
supposed to be in your life, right? So
Yeah.
when you don't heal, you kind of can it can be a block, it can be a barrier to
Mm.
building new healthy relationships. And that may be what you strive for, but you don't realize that you're not able to appreciate
Yeah.
the desired relationship that you want because you still have pain that has not been addressed
Mm.
from your previous experiences.
Yeah. You said so many words. I'm like trigger, forgiveness, free yourself, block, barrier, like all those words are so very important. And I think when you were talking about those feelings or that experience being dormant, that is that's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we think that certain things happen from romantic relationships or just
Right.
dating or relationship breakups, but sometimes those triggers stem back from our childhood
Absolutely.
that we never addressed, that we never
Absolutely.
talked about or
Yep.
even thought about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So triggers, I feel like, and I'm probably gonna sound crazy saying this, but I think triggers are a good thing because
Mm.
it helps you to like identify where the hurt is.
That's not crazy.
Okay, that's not crazy.
That's not crazy.
Okay.
Because I understand exactly what you're saying, right? Because
Yeah.
that's how you learn,
Yeah.
right? What the
Yeah.
pain is, because you may not have been able, had it not been for that trigger response, you may have never identified that there was even an
Mm,
issue, that
yeah.
there was even a place of pain that you hadn't addressed yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not crazy at all.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me know I'm not crazy. Yeah. So people are commenting, Faith. You getting a lot of love.
Oh,
Let's see. So my sister Jessica says she protecting her peace. My sister Shakira says she protecting her peace. My cousin Sadia says she protecting her peace. Vanessa, my sister from Cali, she says she protecting her peace without
amen.
any explanations.
Yes,
Leave
that part.
people where they are,
That part.
right?
No explanation
Without
needed.
exactly. Let's see. My Auntie Joanne said, keep our peace intact. That's right. Faith is awesome. So they saying you awesome.
Oh.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, two more questions, and then I'm gonna open up the floor for our audience to ask questions, and
Sure.
then we will have you say any last words.
Okay.
All right. So, how would you define life after hurt for an individual that feels like they are stuck and can't overcome that trauma, abuse, or control?
Ooh. Ooh.
I
Uh, I would say that you just have to remember you are not defined
mm,
by your abusive experiences or any negative experiences. Things
mm,
happen to us, but they don't necessarily no, they don't necessarily define us,
mm,
right? And so you have that power that we were talking about before. You have the power to break free of emotional strongholds that were
mm,
caused by past abuse and trauma. You
mm,
control the narrative of your story and how it will read.
mm. Listen, you control the narrative of how your story leads. And I also like that you said you are not defined by your negative
No,
experiences.
no.
You are not defined by your negative experience. Y'all need to put that in the chat. We are not defined by our negative experiences. That is an affirmation. I love
Mm,
affirmations.
I know you do.
I love
You
affirmations.
add to your repertoire.
Yeah. I got to give you credit though, Faith. I got to give you credit. And then our last question, what advice would you give someone that is dealing with shame and guilt of a relationship ending?
Whew. So I'm going to share something that was given to me by a professional mentor of mine, that I
Mm.
have the utmost respect for. He said that sometimes we suffer from what is called false guilt.
Mm.
Yes, that's exactly what I did when he said it.
Mm, right.
And so sometimes we allow, whether it's like other people's expectations of us, to kind of dictate, how we move. We let what they think we should do kind of inform us, or kind of we internalize those things, right? And then we also sometimes create our own stories in our head that are just kind of stories. They don't really have a basis,
Yeah.
right? But we kind of create them, believe them to be true. And when we do that, sometimes we're kind of almost taking on the responsibility of something that we were not the cause of, but we feel
Mm.
that we're responsible for it, and that we have to handle it, and that we have to manage, when it really is not us that has to do it.
Mm.
And so not taking on stuff that isn't ours. And
Mm.
so freeing ourselves, that's what I would really say. I think is it's really good advice when we talk about that shame and guilt, that, just free yourselves from false guilt,
Mm.
especially if it's from an abusive, situation, right? Because the
Yeah.
onus is not on you. You have no reason to feel guilty. You didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Something was done to you.
Yeah.
And so it's not for you to take on what someone else did and try to fix them. No, you just focus on how do you take care of yourself. But
Mm.
we just have to free ourselves from that, because sometimes we do have that false guilt that,
Yeah.
we allow, ourselves to kind of, believe things that aren't true.
Yeah. That's so so very true. We tend to do that a lot.
We do.
And I love that you said focus on how to take care of yourself.
hmm Yes,
And we don't do that. I don't think we do that enough
you don't.
because sometimes we think it's selfish.
Yes. But then not realizing that sometimes it's okay to be selfish when it
Yeah.
comes to caring for yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. This was very, very powerful, Faith. Um, you're awesome.
Oh,
I
thank
am
you.
looking at the comments and people really have enjoyed today's session. Lord, Vanessa says, Lord, help us free ourselves from false guilt. It is real.
Yes, it is.
Yes. And focus on taking care of ourselves. Absolutely. Okay. At this time, are there any questions you guys have for Miss Faith? I see some new visitors. Good evening, Lakeisha. Do you know Lakeisha Faith?
Yes. Hello.
Okay. She said good evening. Thank you for watching. Lakeisha, Tamika Miller.
Yes. Hi, Tamika.
All right. Any questions, guys? We want to make sure that we address any questions that you have before we end the show. Again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys had so much. I mean, you guys may want to go back and rewatch this broadcast because it was so many great nuggets Faith gave to us that we could really just, let marinate and reflect on so that we're making better decisions and we're becoming a better version of ourselves. All right. So it looks like there are no questions. Any last comments for our viewers?
Yes. One thing that I just want to give a general kind of statement around, it didn't come up in the conversation, but it's important too when we talk about abuse of any kind, that
Mm,
we keep in mind that it's not specific to
Hmm.
any particular population. Anyone can be in an abusive relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's not gender specific. Women can be abusive. We sometimes are led to believe society, we portray that it's just women,
Mm-hmm.
who may be in abusive relationships, but men can be in abusive relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, as you shared in your work, you work with young people.
Yeah.
Teen dating violence is real.
Mm. Yes, it is.
You hear in the news and see and hear about different stories, of serious cases leading, to serious harm and sometimes unfortunately death.
Yeah.
It happens in same sex or same gender relationships as well. It happens, with our seniors. We don't think about our seniors,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter how educated you are. You can be a very educated person. I'm a social worker by profession, but that does not mean that I cannot end up in an abusive relationship,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because again, when we talk about the cycle of abuse, it doesn't start off that way,
Mm.
because we think about relationships, Nicole, and I know you know what I mean, right? We always talk about relationships. When you're starting a new, fresh relationship, you send your representative,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's just like a job interview. So you're going to
Yeah.
send your best, better self. And so it's
Yeah.
not until time, evolves that you start to see certain behaviors or certain, patterns. And that's another thing too, when we talk about, abuse, there's patterns of the
Yeah.
abuse. So you kind of need to be able to recognize those patterns of abuse. But I just want to just make sure that that's clear, that anyone, no matter how educated you are, no matter what race you are, no matter how much money you make or don't make, no matter where you live, right? Anyone can be in an abusive, situation. But just remembering that you can come out of it.
Yeah.
And just tapping into, resources, knowing what's available, to you, because if you get the help that you need, that can help to minimize the long lasting impact that abuse can have.
Mm. Wow. The long lasting impact that abuse can have. Yeah, it does have a long lasting impact. It can have a long lasting impact.
Mhm.
And I
Absolutely.
thank you for sharing that, because abuse does not have a name, a face, like you said,
No,
a
it does
race,
not.
a, a salary range. It doesn't have
Nope.
any of that. And anybody can be susceptible to it.
Absolutely.
And I really like that you said it doesn't start off as abuse.
No, no. And that's how, Nicole, one of the questions you asked earlier, around what would make, a person not leave, right? And because it doesn't start off like that, right? So
Mm,
you kind of get looped in, you get pulled in, and that's a part of
yeah,
the process. That's a part of the tactics, right,
yeah,
of that abuser.
yeah.
Um, that and they can, almost like a chameleon, they can switch it up
Oh, yeah,
accordingly, right?
yeah,
Put it on a little thick, initially, and
yeah.
then you know bring it down and then come back in again. It's like a cycle phase,
Mm,
like, it can escalate. There can be an incident, and then we come into a honeymoon phase. Let me
mm,
apologize. Try to reel you back in. And then the
yeah,
person believes it until something else happens, and then it escalates again.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a term for that?
Well, it's a cycle of abuse.
Yeah, cycle of
It's a
abuse.
cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's phases of it.
Yeah. And that very thing can have people doubt their intuition.
Absolutely.
and that voice, because they see this cycle and they
Mhm.
say, but they love me, or they did this for me, or they care about me. So they start to rationalize the
Yeah.
behavior, abusive
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, he was just upset or she was just upset or they just had a bad day.
Yes,
They didn't
yes,
mean it. I
yeah,
understand. I could have done something different, right? So it's yeah, it's
yeah,
very intense, it's very deep.
yeah. It does go deep. It goes very deep. So I know we were about to wrap something up, but
I
I
see
put
the
another.
wheels turning. I see the wheels turning.
Oh God, another question, because I think, like you were saying earlier, the last point you had brought up about abuse not having a name or face, or not just being gender specific, right?
Mhm.
Um, what advice, honestly, Faith, would you give to a man that may watch this video, who may
Hmm.
feel ashamed, or just like, emasculated, or less of a
Mhm.
man, for wanting to share that he is in an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
or has experienced abuse? What advice would you give him?
That he matters. Right?
Mm,
Whoever he is that's out there, right? You matter, right?
yeah,
And your pain and your experience is no different than a woman or anyone else who experienced, trauma or
yeah,
abuse, right? It is what it is, and it's
yeah,
okay, and it doesn't say anything about you. There's nothing that they need to be ashamed of, because
yeah,
again, they are not the cause of what that woman or other person did to them. The other person is responsible for it. They are not responsible for the abuse. It's the same. It doesn't matter whether they're a male
yeah,
or not. They
yeah,
have been put in a situation that they did not deserve, just like any other person who's been abused doesn't deserve the abuse. They don't deserve it either, and they have every right to stand up, and say, "This happened to me."
yeah,
Right. And I know that society, right, because it's really about society needs to change the mindsets,
yes,
because society creates, unfortunately, this kind of picture, if you will, that, well, how is it that a woman can, how you let a woman abuse you, and be, that society kind of creates that, right?
yeah,
So we have to separate out, having this kind of, this masculine kind of, persona, that says that, a man is not supposed to, or can't, or shouldn't allow himself to be
yeah,
victimized by a woman, because abuse is abuse.
yeah,
And, as we talked about, there's different forms of abuse,
yeah.
right? It's not necessarily just about physical. It's not just about, the physical. It's emotional, it's verbal.
Mm.
And so, anyone,
Financially too, right?
yeah, exactly. Right.
Mhm.
And so, they have the right also to have a healthy relationship, free of abuse, free of having someone control them, free of being put down, right?
Mhm.
They also deserve to have a happy, healthy life
Yeah.
in relationships.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for adding that to this platform, because that was not a part of my questions. And
That's
so it's great that you share that. And I do hope, any man or young man or
Mhm.
teenage boy that may watch this broadcast will receive peace from what you just said.
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
it's about. They deserve their peace as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So Vanessa would like to share would like for me to share your contact information, Faith. So let me know if
Okay,
that's okay.
that's
I guess
okay.
she want okay. Vanessa, I'll get you the information. Tamika said yes, it does not discriminate. You are absolutely right, Tamika. And Monique Atkins. She said, "Hey, ladies. Hey, Monique."
Hi. Hi, Monique.
All right. Well, that concludes our broadcast on what is abuse and identifying characteristics and behavior traits and how to heal from them. And thank you so very much, Faith. What you gave was invaluable. And just know that the information you just shared to the world, um, people will be blessed. People will be blessed.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to share, something I'm very passionate about, sharing information. Yeah, the more we know, the better it is. It's all about being informed. And so
Yes.
I'm grateful to be able to have this opportunity.
Yes. Amen. Amen. Being informed to make more informed decisions.
Yes, that part. That.
All right. Hey, Jess, that's my baby sister.
Hey, hi, baby sister.
And let's see. Tamika said, well, Vanessa said, thank you, ladies. This was amazing. Thank you for watching. Tamika said, thank you. This was so informative and transformative.
Awesome. Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Faith. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we gonna have to bring you back for part two. What y'all think?
I'm all right with it. I'm ready.
Yes, yes. We definitely gonna have to bring you back for part two to go a little deeper.
Okay.
All right, Faith. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
All right, guys. So thank you again for tuning in. I am so excited that we just wrapped up with part two of our relationship breakup series. Don't forget that we go live next Saturday, February the 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay. Next week's topic is going to be, why does my soul feel crushed after a breakup? The spiritual impact of relationship breakups. So we are going to go deep, y'all. So make sure that you guys tune in next Saturday, 7 p.m., same time, same place. Until then, you guys have a great week and remember that God is proud of you. Peace.